So that's the future of humanity. I mean, suppose who hasn't looked like that the morning after a night of heavy drinking?
This is a bit of all right, isn't it?
Welcome to Tranquility Spa.
Why would you need to defend a holiday spa with an ionic membrane? My friends are out there. We need to evacuate, and if you can't, you die.
Hello, I'm Phil. Welcome to my channel where I talk about all sort of pop culture, and I like to review Doctor Who because I love Doctor Who. I love talking about it. This is the review of the third episode of Series 12 of Doctor Who, Orphan 55. There are spoilers ahead. Just be warned. Orphan 55 is an interesting title. Everyone kind of assumed beforehand that it related to a person. There was lots of speculation that it might be one of the green-haired people, for instance, one played by James Buckley, or the child. I can't remember. Silas, that was the character's name. The child Silas. It was neither of those, it was the planet. That's what Orphan 55 referred to. I don't know if anybody guessed that. It's written by Ed Heim, who of course wrote It Takes You Away in Series 11. It Takes You Away seemed to be a bit of a Marmite one for fans. There were people that thought it was the best episode of Series 11. And there were people that didn't really like it, especially didn't like the end. I was one of those people. I actually thought they had a lot going for it in the sort of first 2/3 of it. There was a lot of great creepiness, but I think it was a bit rushed, and the whole thing with the frog was a bit too out there and didn't really make sense to me. And yeah, I mean, I'm not here to review It Takes You Away, but needless to say, I wasn't as enthusiastic about it as some people were. So Orphan 55, does that improve it? Well, there is again some great atmospheric stuff, and one of the things I loved about It Takes You Away, the bits I did like, were the kind of atmosphere that Ed Heim created, and the tenseness and the tension and the the general ambience of fear. He did a really good job, especially in that first half of It Takes You Away and in this, of creating a very sort of heightened sense of fear, both in the audience and to portray that the fear that the actors, the characters were feeling. And that, I would say, is absolutely spot on here. When the creatures first get in, when the Dreg first get in to the complex, that it kind of felt very alien, the kind of aliens stalking around, picking people off one by one. It was filmed brilliantly. The design of the monsters was fantastic. They are definitely very creepy. Credit to the designers there. And the way it was shot and filmed, brilliantly atmospheric. Loved it. Created just the right tone. So I think that's where Ed Heim excels, creating those kind of atmospheric moods. Very good here. Just to backtrack slightly, no pre-credit title sequence this week, which I kind of liked. I missed it when we didn't have it all the time, but what I think is a good way to settle into this, and we had pre-title sequences for the last two episodes, we don't have one this time. I think, basically, let the story dictate whether or not you get a pre-title sequence or not. If the story needs it, you have one. Or if it works for the story, have one. If it's going to benefit the story, going straight into the story after a title sequence with nothing before, do that. You got to work with what the story... You got to let the story dictate whether or not you have it. And last year, I think there were some times when there should have been a pre-title sequence in Series 11, and they didn't have one. Here, they seem to be, I think, hopefully getting the balance right and having a bit of a mixture. So sometimes you get a pre-title sequence, sometimes you don't. I like that. One thing I really liked at the beginning of this episode was the contrast, the sort of tonal contrast between the scenes of the TARDIS team as they were arriving and the security team that were the two-man security team that were knowing there's a threat and preparing for the threat that they were encountering, because you had a lot of comedy coming from the TARDIS team arriving. You had Graham doing his kind of like, oh, I'm gonna sit and relax, and then I'm gonna get up and relax somewhere, that kind of spiel. You had Ryan with his virus getting infected and hallucinating bats. And then he's flirting with the girl. And then you had Yaz interrupting the couple that are about to, the old elderly couple that are about to get engaged, potentially, or the guy is about to propose. That was all, nice little bits of comedy, but then cut between those bits were the tension ramping up with the main storyline and the seriousness of the security guards. And I quite like the contrast of those scenes. Flipping between the two was a great contrast, and it didn't last too long. It could have gone on for ages. It lasted about the right time. I think that was a nice way to start the episode. Where I think this episode falls down a little bit, though, is some of the dialogue is too exposition heavy, and this was a big criticism a lot of people had of Series 11 as well. There's just too much exposition a lot of the time. There were times, especially after the initial attack, where the Doctor was just spewing exposition after exposition. Background of the, there's a lot of gobbledygook in terms of techno babble and stuff like that, and it just felt that there was too much. It just felt like she was explaining stuff that maybe should have been shown. I don't know, but it kind of, I noticed it, and if I'm noticing it, it's pulling me out of the plot a bit too much. And after last week's episode, where we got some absolutely fantastic stuff from Jodie and the character of the Doctor, this episode felt, especially with all that exposition, like beyond just, it wasn't just like she was just surface level Doctor. That exposition really hampered her, and I don't think it served the character very well. And there wasn't really anything to grab onto from the Doctor in this episode. In terms of the companions, we had a lot from Ryan, and there was some great stuff I liked from Ryan this episode. The other two, however, you didn't get an awful lot from. Got a little bit from Yaz. You didn't really get much from from Graham at all. He, had the odd quippy line here and there, but there wasn't much sort of substance. Actually, I've just remembered one bit. The one bit of Graham that I actually noticed and thought, oh, that's a really nice moment, was when he was worried about Ryan and he thought he might have died, and their little hug and reunion when they met back up again. That was quite nice, but it was so fleeting and short that there wasn't much to it. But it was a nice little moment to continue their sort of like familial relationship, their granddad relationship to it. So a little bit nice there, but mostly Graham's sort of just quipping here and there, sort of very much background. Yaz has a little bit more to do. There's a bit of jealousy I noticed with her when she noticed the flirting between him and Trixabel, and I'm still thinking that they might develop that into a relationship. I think they're going down that route with her and Ryan. But beyond that, there wasn't an awful lot. Ryan, however, got quite a nice few bits with Trixabel, and I quite liked the way their backgrounds sort of paralleled with their relationships with their parents. She'd had a dad who died, he'd had a mum who died. She had a very troublesome relationship with her mum, who she viewed as not being there for her, so much so that her mum didn't recognise her, because her mum was in the plot this whole time. And that was a twist we found out later. And that parallels, of course, with Ryan's relationship with his dad. So I would have liked to have seen that developed a little bit more, because it was there, and if you know it's there, it's there. They did the whole, yes, we both had a parent that dies thing, but Ryan never actually vocalised the fact that their other parental relationship was very similar. That, her mum, she felt abandoned by her mum, he had felt abandoned by her dad. I kind of expected him to bring that up vocally as well, which he didn't, which I thought was a missed opportunity. James Buckley was a guest star in this, and very much felt like a background character. There's not really, I don't really have anything to say about him. I didn't dislike him, but, he didn't really do much either. I think his son was much more interesting than he was. And his son, incidentally, I can't remember the actor's name, but whoever was playing Silas, probably one of the better child actors in Doctor Who. We get a troubled relationship with child actors in Doctor Who. They're often not very good. He was a very competent actor, and I thought he did a very good job. But their storyline kind of felt like maybe half of it was left on the cutting room floor, or they were just there as sort of background anyway. So let's talk about the big revelation of this episode. They were on Earth the whole time. This is Earth in the future at some point, and it's devastated, and humans have evolved into the Dreg. The creatures, the menacing looking creatures that are attacking them, are the one possible version of humanity's future. I quite like this as a plot idea, and I think the first half of the story, when they first discover it and how it's set up, I think is done really well. Discovering the underground train station sign in Russian, knowing that they're actually in what used to be Serbia, that's interesting. What I think they didn't land the execution of the ending though, and here's something I thought I wouldn't end up saying about this era of Doctor Who, because a lot of people are gonna jump on this and go, oh god, they're it's trying to be political again. Doctor Who has always been political. Okay, there were the Green Death from the Pertwee era is all about ecological disaster. It is absolutely along the same lines as this episode. However, and I don't usually hold to this argument, but I do feel this was a little bit on the nose at the end. The setup, the plot line of it being, humans have destroyed the Earth, fine, up until the point, basically, where the episode ends, and we get not really a resolved ending, and we get this weird ending where it's a lecture from the Doctor. And it kind of ends like that. It reminds me of those Saturday cartoons from when I was a child in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. I'm thinking Thundercats and things, where they'd have an exciting adventure, some important lessons in, but then they would end the episode where they'd all stand around and tell you what the lesson is, and then Snarf would say something funny and they'd laugh. And then the episode ended. I don't mind the Doctor making a point. The Doctor can make a point. The Doctor can have a viewpoint, and it can be a viewpoint that they want to get across. It's just that it ended with that, and it was this weird kind of they just left these people on this planet, and they don't know what's happened to them, and they weren't. They've got the TARDIS. They could fly there and at least try and save them or something. But then the Doctor just gives this speech. And she makes valid points. I don't disagree with her points. But it was just a really weird way to end the episode. And I don't think it worked, personally. I get what they were going for. I don't want them to not have politics. I'm not someone who doesn't want politics in the show. Politics absolutely belongs in the show. I just don't think just ending on this lecture was the way to go for this episode. It just kind of felt like, a bit anticlimactic, a bit just a weird way to end an episode. I don't know. So left me on a little bit down at the end. But so it didn't end in the greatest way, but there was some good stuff in there. I did, like the monster was brilliant, and the way that it was used in terms of the ramping up the tension and the way it was shot was all brilliant. Loved that. It was, it just let down by the end, basically. What do you think of it? Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about the ending. I'm curious if the majority of the people out there agree with me on that, if it was a bit of a dud ending, or if you have a different opinion. Happy to hear all opinions. Just keep it, nice and polite in the comments below. Oh, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and all that jazz, because, I don't know, makes me feel nice. Thanks for watching. See you next week for another review. Bye.